The Michael Berry Show.
It is very important that we go back and understand what happened on January 6th of 2021. It's important that we understand what happened and not be told what happened by those with an agenda, but that we do our own research and we ask questions of various people. One of the most important voices in all of that, who has seemingly been silenced officially, is Stephen Sund, who was the Capitol Police Chief at that time on that day, and he's our guest. Chief, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me on, Michael.
Let's start with how you ended up the Capitol Police Chief. Leave January 6th aside. I think you were a Metro police officer in D.C. before that. Talk about your career. Why did you get into law enforcement? Did you have family in it? And then just walk me through your whole career there.
Absolutely. I mean, get this through as succinctly as possible. So I did 25 years with the D.C. police, and I got into policing because my dad had actually gotten sick early on. He had gotten leukemia. He was a B-52 pilot. He had been sick for a number of years, but passed away when I was 16. So after we got back from the funeral, we just happened to be visited by two friends of ours that we used to live with right nearby in California. That became Fremont police officers, Carol and Brad Nini. I still stay in touch with them today. They had reached out and came to visit. This was the same day that we had buried my dad. And as a young 16-year-old, that was a very pivotal part of my life. I looked at it and said, you know what, I think I know what I want to do. And from that point on, I was pursuing right around 23. I applied to a couple different departments, but DC Police picked me up. Started there right around 25. By the time I went into the academy, got out and patrolled as an officer in what they call the 6th District, which is Anacostia, one of the most violent parts of Washington, D.C. Was there for a couple of years, made sergeant, went to 70, which is also one of the most violent parts in Anacostia, South Anacostia down by South Capitol Street, Congress Heights. Patrolled there for a little bit and then started rising up through the ranks, became a lieutenant. And then I got assigned downtown for a little bit and went to Special Operations Division, where I kind of stayed from lieutenant on, doing all the major events, major demonstrations in Washington, D.C., made captain, inspector, being commander of the Special Operations Division from 2010 to 2015. And that's when I retired at the end of the very last day, December 31st, 2015. I retired. We had the Pope come visit in October, and I figured it's a good time to head out. Went out and kind of worked a little bit in the private sector for just about 8 months, and then the House and Senate Sergeant at Arms approached me to come over and become the Assistant Chief of Operations for Capitol Police. And January 7th, I started in 2017, started at the U.S. Capitol Police just a few days before Trump's inauguration. And I'd been involved in, it's probably my 5th or 6th inauguration I've been involved in planning of. So they brought me in right before that and was there. And then in May of 2019 became the chief and started revamping a lot of operations and capabilities. And then January 6th happened, and I was removed from the position the very next day by Speaker Pelosi. And I'm sure our conversation is going to cover a couple of things along there.
Absolutely. But before that, let's set in place our procedure so we know the context within which we're working. I was with Senator Cruz at an event in Milwaukee a few years ago, and he had a large contingent of Capitol Police, and I learned that those are assigned based on kind of death threats, and it's all on a screen, and it turns out he was getting more death threats than Pelosi and every other member of Congress combined. And it was kind of interesting to me that was, that unlike the president, which is kind of, designated Secret Service for the president, it was sort of, where is the threat right now? It might be Jasmine Crockett on Monday. It might be Ted Cruz on Thursday, or whoever that might be. But talk to me about how the Capitol Police Chief is hired and to whom they report and take orders.
Okay, and you're absolutely right about what you just mentioned. We do statutory security details for the leadership before on the House and the Senate side, and then others based on the threat. So you're absolutely right there. So the Capitol Police Chief, and it's interesting. It's not like any other police chief in the country. I report to a Capitol Police Board. They're the one that hire and fire me. Oh, we'll get into that too. They're the ones that really have the hiring authority, but they only do it with the approval of Senate leadership and House leadership. So when I was first hired, you had, Schumer was over on the, for the chief's position. Schumer was over on the Senate side, and Pelosi was on the House side, and they both had to approve my hiring for the position. So you go through, and what's interesting to understand is the Capitol Police Board is made up of 4 individuals: the House and Senate Sergeant Arms, who are considered to be the lead law enforcement agent for the House and and one for the Senate. So when you think of the chief as the top law enforcement official for the legislative branch, I'm sorry, when you think of the chief as the top law enforcement official for the legislative branch, that's not the case. The Senate and the House Sergeant Arms actually are above me. The third person in the Capitol Police Board is the architect of the Capitol, and then the fourth person is the chief of police. The 3 people that are politically appointed, the House and Senate Sergeant Arms, the architect of the Capitol, all have a vote on how things go for the Capitol Police, and they control everything from schedules to which doors we cover, which equipment we can use. If I want to get my officers tasers, I had to go to the Capitol Police Board and get approval, and then I had to go to my oversight committees and get approval for them. If I wanted to deploy fencing, I got to go to the Capitol Police Board. If I want to, pretty much all operations has to be approved by the Capitol Police Board. So that just gives you a little bit of an idea of what I'm dealing with.
No, yeah.
As the chief. It's very political because the House and Senate Sergeant Arms, who carry most of the weight, don't want to do anything that's going to upset their congressional leader. So we may be having a hearing on the Supreme Court justice being nominated, and I want to put up certain fencing. Well, one side may want no fencing put up so protesters can come in and cause problems, or the other side may want to shut down all the buildings for public entry, so we don't have protests.
I think that's going to be a good segue into our next discussion point. Our guest is Stephen Sund, who was the chief of police of the Capitol Police on January 6, 2021, that fateful day. We'll talk about his perspective, which I bet you haven't heard and may be surprised by coming up. I wanted to make the point with his background. This guy's not a lightweight. He's got a BS and MS from Johns Hopkins University, a pretty highbrow, rigorous academic background. He has an MA in Homeland Security from the Naval Postgraduate School. This guy is thoughtful about strategy and operations and logistics in law enforcement. It's what he's devoted his life to. This isn't somebody who rose through the ranks because they checked the right box that they weren't a white male. He is, in fact, a white male. This is a guy who, by all accounts, and I think he has demonstrated, cares deeply about law and order and security and preserving the peace, and that's to be respected. So now we get to January 6th. I know you've told this story because I've seen you tell this story. I wish they'd let you tell your story in public, but let's walk through. I won't interrupt you. Why don't you tell the story as you know it of January 6th?
I will, and I think your listeners will definitely be surprised by what they're about to hear, because a lot of people will hear about Trump offering National Guard and what happened with the National Guard and stuff like this. You're going to hear the truth. This truth has been upheld by congressional hearings. I come with the facts. I'm 30 years law enforcement. I'm not going to say something that I can't back up. So let's take you back to the Sunday before January 6th. January 3rd, it was the first day of the 117th Congress. Regardless if it falls on a weekend, January 3rd is always going to be the first day of a new Congress when it comes into session. We do all the swearing-ins of the members of Congress, so it's a big day up on Capitol Hill. I had been kind of watching, the crowd size that were coming in, and mind you, the intelligence I was getting, and the intelligence is a whole nother issue of what the intelligence I was getting, didn't say anything about any type of coordinated attack at the Capitol, any kind of threat to the federal buildings or to the Capitol or to members of Congress, nothing like that. I was just concerned about the size of the crowd and the number of officers I had to put on my perimeter. I had a 4-foot-high bike rack that was going to surround the Capitol, which is a sizable area. I only had 273 officers to put on that perimeter, and that included response officers for civil disobedience. So it wasn't a whole lot of officers because we had a joint session of Congress. It took a lot of my personnel inside the building. So I'd gone over to the House Sergeant Arms. I'm required by federal law. This is another interesting thing. If I want to bring in any assistance for my officers, any federal assistance, whether it's been National Guard, FBI, any federal assistance, I have to, by law, it's 2 U.S. 1970, get permission from the Capitol Police Board. So Sunday morning at 9:35, I went over to see the House Sergeant Arms, a guy by the name of Paul Irving, who I knew. He carried most of the weight. He was the big heavy hitter. Everyone kind of listened to him on the Capitol Police Board. I knew this would be a sensitive topic for him, but I went over and asked for National Guard support, specifically just for the perimeter, unarmed National Guard support. I wasn't asking for armed National Guard support at that time. He didn't approve it. He didn't approve it specifically because he said he didn't like the optics of the National Guard standing in line with the Capitol in the background. And I think that was because he felt his boss, his main boss, Speaker Pelosi, would have gotten upset about it. And he also said the intelligence didn't support it. Well, yeah, I understand the intelligence didn't support it, but I still worried about the size of the crowds. And I told him, that I'm worried about the size of the crowds, and I'd like to, have some resources on the perimeter with my officers. Again, at that point, he referred me over to Mike Stinger.
Can you give us a time frame again? Yep. When was this conversation, roughly?
This conversation was on Sunday, January 3rd, 3 days before January 6th.
Okay, so plenty of time to muster troops if you need them.
Plenty of times to muster troops. We've used, in my history with DC Police and even with Capitol Police, we use National Guard, and there's plenty of time. But it gets even better because
okay,
I'm going to tell you how we knew the National Guard was prepared. So he refers me over to Mike Stinger, who's now the chairman of the Capitol Police Board. He became the chairman on that day. I went over to his office. Mike Stinger wasn't in. I came back later on, right a little bit after 11. He's in the office, and I can tell he's already been given heads up. I'm coming over to ask for National Guard. When I ask for National Guard support, he won't approve it. Again, he's concerned. Later on, in April of that, after January 6th, I finally asked him. I said, "How do you know I was coming over?" He said, "Irving had told him." Anyway, he wouldn't approve it. He said, "Why don't you call? Do you know anybody at the DC National Guard? If we need their assistance, how quickly could they get here?" And I know the commanding general of the DC National Guard, William Walker, General Walker. I told him I can call General Walker, but that's still not going to help us if we're having issues on the perimeter. But he said, "I got to run out." He's going to the swearing in of members of Congress, and he said that's the best we're going to do. He wouldn't approve it. So he leaves out. I go back to my office. Later on that day, just a short time later, I get back. One of my deputy chiefs approaches me and says, "We received a call from Carol Corbin. She's the program manager for Defense Support for Civil Authorities, which is the National Guard coming to support, civil authorities, law enforcement as needed. She was calling to ask if we were going to be requesting the National Guard for January 6th. Now, I had just been denied twice my request for the use of National Guard on January 6th, and by law, I had to tell him to tell her no, we weren't. I've dealt with her before because I'd been denied. So coming into January 6th, I don't have. Pentagon had offered National Guard. I had to turn it down. I had been denied twice by the House and Senate Sergeant Arms. So coming into January 6th, 12:58, I'm in the command center. We're working with the pipe bomb that we started dealing with down at the Republican National Committee, which is just a couple blocks south of the U.S. Capitol. We had been alerted of a pipe bomb, I want to say right around 12:41 p.m. We're dealing with that. I mean, my watch commander showing me some pictures of the pipe bomb. When somebody says we have a large crowd approaching our west front, I look up, we have cameras. There's two roadways coming up toward the west front, right next to the reflecting pool, Pennsylvania Avenue, Maryland Avenue, coming up to two circles. I see a couple hundred people at each of the circles approaching our fence line. And some of the people in the group got very confrontational and physical with the officers very quickly. I've handled lots of protests. I've seen lots of, where the marchers come up to the gate, and we'll usually have 10, 15 minutes of back and forth where they're yelling and stuff like that before it gets to this point. This was a matter of minutes before they started pulling at the gate and swinging at my officers. And again, this was a core group of people that were in the crowd. So I look down. That's 12:53. I see what's going on. Having come from DC Police, I reached over to DC Police and said, "Hey, if you guys got some resources, send them our way." And then at 12:58, I call the House Sergeant Arms, Paul Irving, to request permission. I'm still required by law to request permission, even in an emergency. Now, Congress has since changed that law. December of 2021, they changed it and allows the chief to call in resources without having to go through this. But anyway, they admitted the failure. So 12:58, I call Paul Irving. It took 11 calls. Let me back up. I start following myself. My adrenaline starts pumping when I'm talking about this. So when I first called him, I said, "It's bad on the West Front. My officers are getting overrun. I need federal resources now. I need permission to call in the National Guard." He says to me, quote, "Let me run this up the chain, and I'll be right back to you." So he has a liaison officer sitting right behind me watching the same thing I'm seeing on my screens. I get off the phone. I'm dumbfounded. I'm seeing, again, my officers now backing up as the crowd's getting starting to move on the Capitol. So I call Mike Stinger, the Senate Sergeant Arms. call him immediately and say, hey, we're getting overrun again. He has the liaison sitting right behind me. I need immediate permission to bring in the National Guard. He said, what did Paul Irving tell you? I said, he's going to run it up the chain, meaning he's going to run it to Speaker Pelosi and get right back to me. He said, well, let's wait to hear from Paul Irving. I made 11 more phone calls to the two of them, 71 minutes before I finally got approval at 2:09 p.m.
The Michael Berry Show.
He's just perfect.
Stephen Sund, he's our guest, telling his story. And we're now in the middle of the afternoon. You've waited over an hour. You've made a number of calls. The situation is turning. In your estimation, are the people who are beginning to approach the Capitol, do you suspect that any of those individuals are federal plants? Do you suspect that they're paid activists? Do you think they're just people who showed up or frustrated? Do you have a sense of that?
So are you asking like at the time, or are you asking now that I reflect back on it?
I'm glad you asked. I guess both would be important to know.
Yeah, so at the time, all I was thinking about is how do we get my officers some assistance. They were getting their rear ends handed to them, and I need to get them some assistance real quick. And I was just dumbfounded at the repeatedly denials and delays I was getting. Looking back on it, I keep hearing, I try and really stick to it, be a person of the facts. If I know facts, I'm going to pass them on. I hear a lot about, there could have been Antifa in the crowd. There could have been, different people in the crowd. Very well could be. If I had facts to that, I'd absolutely pass that on to you. Looking at some of the videos, you see a lot of people all wearing, looks like brand new equipment, brand new hats, flags, stuff like that. Who knows what that could tell you. But I will tell you, I've suspected, all along, and it wouldn't be unusual for an event in Washington, D.C. when you talk about federal agents, whether it's a 4th of July celebration, a state funeral, a cherry blossom parade, even something like that. We still have put together some of these plainclothes teams that oftentimes are made up of people from the Washington field office of the FBI, Secret Service, some of the Joint Terrorist Task Force members, just to go out there and keep an eye, look for any issues, or if we get a suspicious package, they can respond to the suspicious package quickly to start making assessments. So I wouldn't have been surprised to think, okay, we had some plainclothes assets in the crowd. But as I began to do my research, and I literally got stripped out of my office the very next day, and hopefully we have time to get to that. And I literally sat at home, and I had people come out of the woodwork. I had whistleblowers come out and start pushing information to me, and found out that the FBI had been receiving information just prior to January 6th that indicated there's several what they consider domestic terrorists that were most likely planning to come to Washington, D.C. for the event. Then as we got closer, the numbers seemed to get higher. So, and I found this in the aftermath that at one point they were tracking 19 people that were on their domestic terrorist list as planning on coming to Washington, D.C. Now, I can tell you this, they're not tracking them with just nobody. They're going to be tracking them with agents. If they think somebody comes in, they know they have a flight coming in or something like that, they're going to be putting eyes on these people. So it wouldn't, if we have that many people that they suspect are domestic terrorists, I suspect you're going to have significant resources in the crowd watching them. So that's what I base my opinion on. Now, Christopher Wray has come out and said that there was a number of what they call confidential human sources, CHSs, in the crowd. Some people have said the CHSs were the ones watching the domestic terrorist targets. I don't buy that. That's not what I consider good police work, because you can only trust a CHS so much. But that's where I always base my opinion on that. One, I wouldn't have been surprised if there's plainclothes assets in the crowd. But when you start hearing about, there's some of these people that were out there that were pushing them to get into the Capitol and move on the Capitol, I find that very, very concerning. And if proven to be true, that's definitely not what they're supposed to be doing, and that is, contrary to the oath they take.
I know you choose your words carefully, not out of cowardice, but out of caution. Is it outside the realm that could be the case?
Outside the realm that some people could be pushing the group? Well, when you sit back and you think about why am I denied repeatedly in advance? Why am I denied while, just the blatant that while my officers are under attack? And then I run into problems with the Pentagon. Finally, once I do get approval, approving my request, and now we find out that there's probably some influence coming from General Milley on that, the influence from General Milley onto Acting Secretary of Defense Christopher Miller that caused him to place additional restrictions on the National Guard that no one knew about. When you start looking at that, you're like, yeah, this really, could make a really interesting conspiracy theory novel when you look at what was going on in that aspect. And, really who is getting the most traction out of the whole January 6th initiative. We haven't been able to identify the pipe bomber yet, which is, I find that very interesting. But, your listeners probably would be surprised that when I activated mutual aid, the New Jersey State Police made it before the D.C. National Guard coming down. And the D.C. National Guard had 155 troops within eyesight of the Capitol, and they didn't get there till 5:40 p.m. at night, once all the fighting was over. And remember, I told you, when I finally got in touch with the Pentagon wanted me on a conference call. This was right around 2:34 p.m. They wanted me on a conference call to then find out why I'm requesting National Guard. I think that would have been fairly self-evident with anybody watching this on TV. But I'm on the phone with a guy by the name of Lieutenant General Walter Pyatt. Also on the phone with me is Mayor Bowser, Chief of Police for the D.C. Police, Robert Conti, the Director of Emergency Management for D.C., a number of other people, including a guy that at one point was the Army's acting General Counsel, Colonel Earl Matthews. He has since come out as a whistleblower on my behalf. And I told him, I said, I need National Guard support immediately. This is a life and death situation. They've now gotten into the Capitol. We're battling to keep them out of the Capitol. And he tells me the exact same thing Paul Irving told me. I don't like the optic of the National Guard standing aligned with Capitol in the background. I was dumbfounded. I'm hearing the exact same thing. So, I'm wondering, is there some talking points behind this? I'm begging. I'm almost at tears. And the mayor's come out and said this. I was almost at tears begging him to send me resources. And kept hearing this over and over. And he said his recommendation is to deny my request. That was his first response. And then I kept pleading with him. He said, well, let me run this up the chain. And that's when we had the shooting of Ashley Babbitt. And I had to get off the phone.
It's so frustrating. I mean, I think in many ways, I look at what happened in your career. I think of how many officers that day never recovered. And we know that some took their own lives. I think of how many people who went to the Capitol, in my suspicion, who did little or nothing, and relatively speaking, and ended up in prison. I just think of this as a horrible, as Richard Nixon, or as Gerald Ford referred to the Nixon administration, it feels like a long national nightmare. And it's extremely, extremely disturbing. And I believe, you don't have to, and I'm not saying you do or don't, I believe that nefarious forces were at work here, and a lot of good people doing their jobs, and a lot of people, patriots, got caught up in it and were terribly, terribly affected by it. You mentioned earlier, you made reference to, and I hope we'll have time to get to that. We will make time in the next segment. Stephen Sund is our guest. He was the Capital City Police Chief the Capitol Police Chief on January 6, 2021.
Representative Jackie, are you here? Where's Jackie?
A crash that killed Congresswoman Jackie Walorski.
Michael Berry
I'm
Show.
really big sure that she was going to be here.
And you made reference, Chief, to getting pulled into an office. I wasn't sure exactly, but you said, I hope we'll have time to talk about that. And I made a little scribble note to go back to that so that I do make time for you. So go ahead. The floor is yours.
I appreciate it. So, here we are, January 6th. We get everybody back into session. The National Guard finally shows up at 5:40 p.m. We have to swear them in as special police officers. Once they get off their bus, the fighting's over. We've got everything done, everything secured. I brought in 17 law enforcement agencies, 1,700 police officers. That's all taken care of. What did they do? They line up with all their riot gear, take a picture with the Capitol in the background, and put it on Military Time magazine. I thought you'd just get a kick out of that. When the Pentagon had said they were so concerned about the optics, and to have that be the optics that they took away from it, that was interesting. So the next day, we're briefing January 7th. The morning of January 7th, we're briefing members of Congress now. Now, mind you, that evening, I talked to Speaker Pelosi 3 times. First time right around 5:35. I'd gone over to brief Vice President Pence. We had him at a secure location on Capitol Hill. He had been calling me a couple of times, asking me to come over and brief him. I couldn't leave because, I had to be up in the command center getting things under control. But once we could, I went over to brief him. When I briefed him of when we can get them back into session, he got Speaker Pelosi on a call. We briefed her. And this has now all come out. You see the film footage that comes out from her daughter that was with her, Speaker Pelosi, where she's saying, I take responsibility. But and you'll see some of this that I talk about. And there's a video of me with Pence and her getting a call from Pence. And that's one of the calls. So I talked to her 3 times. So the next day we're briefing my oversight. We're briefing members of Congress about, what the plan is moving forward, what the plan is with National Guard support. When I get a call that Speaker Pelosi, this was right around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, is getting ready to go on national TV and call for my resignation. I said, okay. My general counsel and my chief administrative officer, said, hey, let's go in your office. We'll watch it there. Gave my wife a little heads up, went in, watched it, and it was about a 20-minute press conference. And it's on YouTube. You can watch it. It's the very end of the press conference. It's a planning question. Somebody asked, what are you going to do about the security failures up on Capitol Hill? She says, that's a great question. We're going to do an after-action study, which would have been smart if she just stopped there. But then she calls me out by name and says, I'm calling for the resignation of Chief Son. There was a failure of leadership at the top, and he has to go. He failed. I'm trying to think exactly what she said, but you could tell she stutters over her voice for a little bit. Now, mind you, I had tried to get National Guard in advance on January 3rd and repeatedly on January 6th and been denied by her Sergeant at Arms specifically. And then she goes on national TV, says there's a failure of leadership at the top of the Capitol Police, calls me out by name, then tells the American public, I haven't even called her since this occurred, which is a lie, and then calls for my resignation. I sat and talked to my wife. I hadn't slept for 36 hours. I was shell-shocked. I said, fine. I submitted my letter of resignation with a 3-week transition period. And the very next morning, I got a call saying you're immediately. I was cut off from all my computer access and was to move out of my office immediately. So over that weekend, I actually was moving everything out of my office and has never stepped back and foot in that office again. Nobody has talked to me. Well, very little. I had to go down for a couple of conferences, but yeah, didn't get access to any investigation, nothing like that. So I agree. There was a number of key people in that crowd that I think were problematic, but I think a lot of those people in that crowd were what I call strap hangers, people that just kind of followed along, looked at the crowd, went in, didn't do anything, didn't assault the officers at all. That I think it's a shame how some of these people got treated. I've been in policing for a long time. I've never seen that type of levels of sentencing handed down, even for APO, assault on a police officer. So I was kind of surprised by that. But to be stripped away from an agency I loved, when I tried to prevent that, now Congress has come out. If you look at some of the recent hearings and reports, Congress has said if the Sergeant at Arms had approved Son's request for National Guard support on January 3rd, chances are the Capitol would have never been breached. And then in December 17th, 2024, under Chairman Barry Loudermilk, their last report that they did, now that I think the committee's coming back again, their last report exonerates me by name. But I'm still fighting to get the retirement. My retirement was stripped. All benefits, everything like that.
What?
Was immediately stripped. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yep. Yeah. I was only a few months away from being totally vested. And I do believe if the facts have been known, I may even still be there today. Who knows? But yeah, they exonerated me December 17th, 2024. I'm one of maybe a handful of people in history that Congress has exonerated by name, which is interesting. But I'm still working with the committee, still working with Chairman Loudermilk, working to get some executive branch support to have them look at my case to see about returning whatever benefits may have been stripped from me.
How many years in law enforcement?
I did a total of 30 years in law enforcement. I did retire from D.C. Police. I did get my retirement from D.C. Police, but for me, it's now just it's not the federal retirement. It's not anything big, but for me, it's the principle.
It is.
It's the fact that I tried to stop this. I tried to stop it repeatedly. Was repeatedly denied, and this all I've turned over all my phone records, my transcripts, my emails. They have everything. And I just find that interesting that, I'm the one targeted, but, we'll fight. I know the truth is coming out, and as more of the truth comes out, the better it looks for me.
Lives are destroyed in this manner. you're not going to allow your life to be destroyed because you are a survivor and a prevailer, but lesser men would be. And I think it's very important to see, Chief Sund, I always counsel doing what I do. I am approached with a lot of what will be called conspiracy theories. And that is, sometimes slapping a pejorative tag on a theory that might very well have otherwise been legitimate. So I have come to learn, and I counsel this often, you have to be careful that you don't believe every conspiracy theory that is offered just because you're prone to believing and inclined and biased and prejudiced toward conspiracy theories. However, the parallel to that is you have to be careful if you refuse to believe anything called a conspiracy theory, or you'll end up 18 shots into Joe Biden's protocol and Fauci's laughing at your funeral. So I think there is somewhere in between where you have a more temperate, measured approach to news of the day. But several of the things that you describe strike me as so outside the chain of command, so outside traditional policing principles, particularly as it relates to a highly political environment. And I realize that you know much more and could say much more damning things. And I respect the fact that you're holding that tight. That would be in your defense. But these are things that I think every American needs to know, and that the Liz Cheney show trial and all of that, which they didn't allow you to speak to, I consider this to be a major calamity, a major disaster in American life that needs to be explored to extremely great extent. Chief, if you can hold with me for one more segment, I have a couple more questions.
They remain scared to death of you, and they remain scared to death of Trump.
The Michael Berry Show.
You're not going anywhere. Even if Trump does, you're not.
He's written a book about all this. We'll talk about that in just a moment. He's the former police chief of the Capitol Police on January 6, 2021. Nancy Pelosi went after him and basically destroyed his career, as it were. Chief Sund, you had a lot of guys. How big is the Capitol Police Force?
Capitol Police Force, when I was there, a lot of people are kind of surprised by it. It's 1,963 officers with a budget of about $463 million.
Yeah.
It comes out to be about the 25th police department in the country.
My sons I have a son who's a senior in high school and a son who's now a sophomore in college. And they interned for congressmen this summer. And I had worked for a law firm in D.C. 30 years ago, so it was fun for me and my wife to get to go back and spend some time there and meet them for lunch and walk around the Capitol and do the tours and all that. We hadn't done that in a long time. And, it's significant. People don't realize it is as you said, it would be about the 25th largest police force in the country. And there are real security concerns, and somebody could argue that's too many or whatever else. It's a spread out area. You have kind of the boulevards, the way that the boulevards, the Esplanade style, big, grand European boulevard, that's hard to police. There's a lot that goes into this. But I want to go back to January 6th and the officers there. There were officers who died, and one, the claim was he was hit by a blunt force object. And my understanding is, whether he was or he wasn't, his family said he did not die from blunt force trauma, but that you had a number of officers who committed suicide. They took their own life. Their lives were not taken by the protesters. Can you speak to that?
Absolutely. You've got, again, a lot of different questions there. So technically, there was one officer whose death was, they went back and said it's what they call immediately a line of duty death. That was Officer Brian Sicknick. He was one of the officers that was involved in some of the fighting on the West Front. He had been sprayed with pepper spray. At one point, the media had said he had been hit with a fire extinguisher, which didn't turn out to be true. I actually know the D.C. police officer that got hit by that. But ended up later on that night at about probably close to 10 o'clock, maybe between 9 and 10, was walking with a group of officers. We now have the Capitol under control. We've got a bunch of officers on the perimeter. Inside's under control. He's now walking with a couple of Capitol Police officers and a Virginia State trooper who happens to be a medic to go get a bite to eat. He's walking along and he just drops And the medic immediately went to work on him. And I had a chance to talk to the medic. He said, as soon as he hit the ground, there was he was completely unconscious. He went over to GW Hospital where they identified that he had what appeared to be some type of a neurological issue at the base of his brainstem with no brain activity, and then ultimately passed away the very next day. That's the case I think you're talking about. The autopsy by the DC medical examiner was concluded. They concluded in the autopsy that he passed away of what they said were natural causes, and he had a double stroke at the base of his brainstem. Later on, the same medical examiner in a press conference had stated that the activities of the day contributed to his medical condition. So it wasn't in the writing, but that was enough. If you have somebody that's on duty, and I'm just saying this from a law enforcement management or leadership point of view, if you have somebody that's on duty and conducting their line of duty and dies, that's going to be a line of duty death. And this was a line of duty death. So that was a situation with Brian Sicknick. Then what you had is on that Saturday, which would have been the 9th, January 9th, you had the first of a series of suicides. A person by the name of Howard Liebengood, he was a U.S. Capitol Police officer, lived out in Fairfax County, committed suicide. I was in moving all the stuff out of my office when my watch commander came in and passed on that news to me. The person who they made acting chief, and that's a whole story in itself, was at home, and I had to call her and tell her, the news and tell her to come on in because, we got a lot to do. But So his suicide ultimately, after a lot of back and forth, was made a line of duty death. My thought is, with many different lines of work, especially law enforcement, you're exposed to a lot of different trauma. You go through, a lot of different issues. There's a lot of PTSD in law enforcement, but we've really fought hard to make sure that officers know that there's options. These officers walk around, they've got a gun on their hip. Whenever they're on duty, they carry it home with them. They have other options than to turn and consider suicide. Now, it's okay to get counseling. A lot of agencies will make counseling available to the officers. I get concerned that it's rare that they'll ever make a suicide line of duty death, and I just hate to think that there's other people that think, okay, now we've had his suicide declared line of duty. Jeff Smith, who was with DC Police, committed suicide, I want to say approximately 10 days later on January 19th. If I have my dates right, I think I'm pretty close, but it's been a couple of years. Committed suicide. His was also determined to be a line of duty death. I get concerned that when you do that, I don't want to give officers the impression that, hey, if I've had really a couple of traumatic experiences and, things aren't going well for me, this is an option for my family to get full benefits in a line of duty death funeral. It just raises, for me, it raises concerns when they go through that this may be an option for them. So, I want any officers listening that this isn't a course of action that you really want to take. Consider the counseling, consider what other options are to you, and don't turn toward your service weapon or anything like that to solve problems.
It's unfortunate that an individual is in a position where that does make sense to them, and it's a good reminder of how difficult this job is and why it is deserving of respect. Stephen Sund, is there anything we did not get to? I got about a minute that you wanted to offer up before we close.
Yeah, I appreciate you mentioning the book. My intention was to never write a book. You always hear about these people writing books. I'm sitting at the desk where when I was forced to leave, I sat down and I started just writing every note. I've done after action reports over and over and over again, and started putting this together. And at first my wife was like, "You sure this is what you want to do?" Because I was reliving this for 14 hours a day, every day. And then when it all started coming together, you wouldn't believe what was going on with the intelligence, with the FBI, I was putting together a briefing beforehand and what was being told to me. That it just, when you look at it, it just got so chaotic, and it didn't have to be like that. I still believe January 6th could have been prevented if they had listened to me. But if so many people had just done their job the way they're supposed to, we wouldn't be here talking right now. So I ended up putting it together. It's now been referred to on Capitol Hill as the definitive after action of January 6th. If your readers are interested, it's on Amazon. Get the paperback. The paperback has the most up-to-date information, but I think they'll find it shocking. The exoneration I got from Congress isn't even in there because it happened since the last edition. So I'm sure that'll be updated. But, January 6th committee under Barry Loudermilk's coming back. They may invite me down to testify. I'm more than happy to testify. That'll be probably the third time I've been down to testify. One time the select committee wouldn't let me testify in public. But you're going to hear you'll read a little bit about the select committee and some of the issues they had. But no, I appreciate you mentioning it, and I appreciate your interest in the story. There's still a lot more there.
Thank you for your service, good sir. Stephen Sund, Capitol Police Chief.
Ladies and gentlemen, Elvis has left the building. Thank you and good night.